I had barely made it halfway down the street when I saw her arms folded, sunglasses on, and that same lemon-sucking scowl she probably wore to bed. Her name was Debra Whitmore. President of our neighborhood HOA, self-declared queen of the cul-de-sac, and the reason my blood pressure spiked every time I turned onto Sycamore Lane. I was finally moving into the house I'd bought outright. No mortgage, no strings. Just me, my dog, and a fresh start in a quiet neighborhood, or so I thought. My name's Jarrett. I'm a 39-year-old paramedic, been through war zones and fire rescues, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for HOA Debra. I was sitting in the cab of the moving truck, my buddy Marco in the passenger seat, when we came around the bend. There she was, standing right in the middle of the road with a smug little folding chair and a clipboard like she was guarding the gates of heaven. I leaned out the window. "Hey there, I'm moving into 423 Sycamore." Mind stepping aside, Debra didn't budge. She tapped the clipboard like she was about to issue me a parking ticket. "You can't park this vehicle here," she said, like she was reading from some HOA scripture. "Trucks over 20 feet require a 72-hour notice to the board. That's in the bylaws." "The truck isn't parked," I said. "It's moving, as in moving. I don't care if you're delivering moon rocks, you're violating policy." "I'm not letting this monstrosity onto our street," Marco muttered under his breath. "Lady's got a death wish standing in front of a truck like that." I threw the truck in park and stepped down. "Look, Debra, I've got a signed deed, a scheduled utility hookup, and movers on the clock. You're not blocking me from entering my own property." "Oh, I absolutely am," she said. "You need to go back and reschedule properly." That's when she pulled out her phone and snapped photos of the truck, the license plate, and get this, me. "Smile for the violation report," she chirped. I took a deep breath. "Debra, either move or I call the sheriff," she laughed. "Go ahead, I know them all personally." I did. I called. And about 15 minutes later, a black and white cruiser rolled up. Sheriff Atkins stepped out, saw the truck, then saw her. "Debra," he sighed like this was not his first HOA rodeo. "Sheriff, this man is attempting to breach HOA protocol with unsanctioned vehicle activity," she said, pointing at me like I was a criminal. Sheriff Atkins turned to me. "You got paperwork, Mr. Jarrett?" "Got the deed, utility confirmations, even the mover's permit from the city." I handed it over. He glanced through it, then looked at Debra. "Everything checks out. He's legally allowed to access his property." "He didn't give the HOA notice," she snapped. "And the HOA doesn't own the roads, Debra," Atkins said. "This is a county-maintained street. You don't get to barricade it." Debra's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. "But he's disrupting the aesthetic." Sheriff Atkins stepped closer. "You're disrupting traffic. If you don't move now, I'll have to cite you for obstruction." Debra's jaw dropped like someone had unplugged her. With the sheriff standing by, we drove the moving truck right past her folding chair. She shouted something about legal consequences, but I was too busy backing into my driveway to care. As we unloaded boxes, Debra stood across the street, filming everything like she was building a case. I waved. Marco did a little dance with a chair over his head. Sheriff Atkins gave me a nod before driving off. "Welcome to Sycamore Lane," he said. "You're gonna love it here. Eventually." The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my dog, Radar, growling low near the front door. I pulled on a shirt, walked barefoot across the hardwood, and looked through the peephole. A stack of neon orange flyers had been taped across my door like someone was trying to gift wrap the house. I opened the door slowly. Radar bolted out and sniffed the air like he was tracking something nasty. I peeled off one of the flyers. It read, "Notice of non-compliance, unauthorized move in pending disciplinary review." At the bottom, Debra's name was stamped in block letters beside her signature, which looked like she'd signed it mid-sneeze. I stepped outside. Every windshield on the block had a flyer tucked under the wiper. Neighbors were already gathering in little knots on their lawns, reading them aloud and shaking their heads. A guy across the street, wearing a faded tank top and cargo shorts, caught my eye. "You Jackson?" he called out. "Yeah," he walked over, holding one of the flyers up like it was radioactive. "Name's Reggie. I live 3 doors down. This is the 3rd time she's done this to a new homeowner in the past year. Last guy ended up selling within 6 months. Why? She fined him for putting up a basketball hoop. Said it violated architectural harmony. Then she tried to ban his teenage daughter from babysitting in the neighborhood cause it constituted an unlicensed business." "How's that even allowed?" Reggie pointed at the flyer. "She makes it sound official. Most folks here just don't want to deal with the hassle, but you're the first one I've seen call the sheriff on her." I folded the flyer and shoved it into my back pocket. "I didn't come here to play games, I came here to live." Reggie laughed once. "You picked the right enemy for that attitude." Later that day, I started documenting. Every piece of paper Debra sent, every interaction, every weird HOA form slid under my door. I scanned and saved it. I set up cameras on the porch, the driveway, and near my back gate, not because I was paranoid. Because I'd worked enough emergency calls to know that people like Debra didn't back down, they escalated. By the 3rd day, she made her next move. I was unloading some tools in the garage when I heard wheels crunching gravel. A tow truck, creeping down the street, slow as syrup. It stopped in front of my property. The driver climbed out, clipboard in hand, and headed toward my driveway. I cut across the lawn. "Can I help you?" He looked up, confused. "I'm here for a vehicle removal." Black F-150, license plate ending in 79. "That's my truck." "Yeah, says here it's been reported as abandoned and leaking fluids." I opened the truck door, turned the ignition, and revved it once. Still runs, no leaks. "Wanna check for yourself?" He scratched his beard and gave a half shrug. "I just go where they tell me, man." "You got the name of who called it in?" He flipped through the form. "Debra Whitmore, HOA president." Radar barked once from the porch like he understood the pattern forming. I took a photo of the tow slip and walked him back to the curb. "Truck's not going anywhere. You tow it without cause, I'll have your company in small claims by Friday." He nodded, climbed back into the cab, and drove off. That night I went digging, not just into HOA bylaws, into Debra herself. A buddy of mine from the fire department owed me a favor and helped me pull public records. Debra had a history, not criminal, technical. She'd been removed from a previous HOA board 2 counties over for gross mismanagement of community funds. Turns out, she'd authorized spending over $30,000 of HOA dues on security upgrades that never materialized. When residents started asking for receipts, she claimed her laptop had been wiped by lightning. I printed out the articles, the board minutes, and a copy of her resignation letter from that HOA. I filed them neatly in a folder labeled Her Majesty. The next morning, I walked into the community's monthly HOA board meeting. It was held in the clubhouse, a beige little building that reeked of old carpet and lemon-scented furniture polish. Debra was seated at the head of the table, surrounded by 4 other board members, 3 of whom looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The moment she saw me, her eyes narrowed. "This is a closed meeting," she said sharply. "Actually, according to your own bylaws, Section 12, subsection D, any homeowner can attend a board meeting unless it's designated executive session. This isn't, so I'm staying." The woman to her left looked surprised. "That's actually correct." Debra cleared her throat. "Fine. But you'll be silent unless recognized." "Gladly," I said, sitting in the back row. They started with some budget talk. Line items for landscaping, pool maintenance, repainting the clubhouse trim. Then Debra got to new business. "I'd like to motion for a formal violation penalty against the new homeowner at 423 Sycamore for unauthorized vehicle storage and hostile behavior toward board directives." I raised my hand. "You're not recognized," she snapped. "Then I'll just pass these forward," I said, holding up a manila envelope. The 4 other board members looked at each other. The woman to Debra's left, who had introduced herself earlier as Carol, reached for the envelope. She opened it. Her eyebrows climbed higher with each page. "Where did you get this?" "Public records, all of it verifiable." Carol spread the documents out in front of the other board members. Debra reached for them, but Carol pulled them back. "Is this true?" one of the other board members asked. Debra bristled. "That was years ago. And it was a misunderstanding. It has nothing to do with this community." "It has everything to do with it," I said. "You've already cost this neighborhood one homeowner, now you're harassing another, and you've got a documented history of misusing funds. You need to leave now," she hissed. Carol stood up. "I don't think he does. In fact, I move to suspend any further disciplinary action against 423 Sycamore until this board can review these documents and consult legal counsel." Seconded, thirded, passed. Debra stood, trembling. "You're all making a mistake, Debra," Carol said gently. "We're not the ones who signed off on $30,000 of invisible security cameras." I left the clubhouse with a weight off my chest and a copy of the meeting minutes in my hand. By the time I got home, 3 neighbors had stopped me to ask what happened. Word spread fast. Reggie dropped off a 6-pack and said, "You just did what we've all been too tired to do." That night, I emailed everything to a local investigative reporter I knew from high school. She called me within the hour. "This woman tried the same thing in my aunt's neighborhood," she said. "I've been waiting for someone to pull a thread. You just gave me the sweater." I didn't sleep much, but not because of stress. For the first time since I moved in, I felt like this place might actually be mine. Not Debra's, not the HOA's, mine, and I had no intention of stopping here. By Saturday morning, Sycamore Lane had a new hobby: watching Debra unravel. I was sitting on my back patio with a cup of coffee when Carol knocked on the side gate. She wasn't alone. Behind her stood 2 board members: Russell, a retired engineer who rarely spoke without measuring his words first, and Tania, a substitute teacher with a sharp eye and sharper memory. "We need to talk," Carol said. Inside, we sat at the dining table. Radar curled up at my feet like he knew something was brewing again. Carol slid a folder across to me. "We've been going through the HOA's financial records. The ones Debra submitted last quarter don't match the bank statements." Tania leaned forward. "There's a discrepancy of over $12,000. Russell added, "We requested full access to the HOA's financial software." Debra denied the request, citing board hierarchy protocol. "That's not a thing." I opened the folder. The numbers didn't lie. Multiple transactions labeled as beautification project expenses were all routed to a company called Pinebrush Solutions. A quick online search showed no address, no website, no contact number, just a P.O. box registered 2 towns over. "This has the smell of a fake vendor," I said. "We think it's a shell company," Carol said, "and we think Debra's behind it." Tania pulled a flash drive from her coat pocket. "I copied her last 5 budget reports. They're all on here." Carol hesitated. "We'd like you to take a look. You've handled yourself better than most lawyers we've met." I blinked. "I'm not a lawyer. I just read boring things really carefully." "Well," Carol said, "then you're the best kind." I spent the next few hours combing through the files. The pattern was unmistakable. The same vendor, Pinebrush Solutions, kept popping up under different categories: landscaping, signage updates, office supplies. But the amounts were always just under the threshold that required a full board vote. Clever in a slimy sort of way, I cross-referenced the P.O. box. It was tied to a UPS store inside a strip mall off Highway 35, and the name on the registration, Maxwell Whitmore, Debra's husband, that was enough. I compiled everything: copies of the financial records, the shell company registration, and a timeline of the payments, and drove it straight to the county district attorney's office. I didn't want this buried under a complaint stack. I wanted it handled. The clerk at the front desk raised an eyebrow as I handed over the packet. "HOA fraud." "Yep, with receipts." She disappeared into the back and returned with a young assistant DA named Tyson NG, who glanced through the file with growing interest. "How recent are these transactions?" he asked. Last one was 5 days ago, I said. He nodded. We take misuse of community funds seriously, especially when it involves falsified vendors. We'll open a formal investigation today. I left the office and called Carol from the car. It's in the DA's hands now, I said. But you all need to act fast. If she senses pressure, she might try to cover her tracks. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something strange. My mailbox door was open. Inside was a single envelope, no postage, no return address. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a typed letter. You've made a mistake. Walk away from this now before things get worse. Sincerely, a neighbor. I scanned it into my phone, then handed it to Reggie when he passed by walking his dog. Handwritten threats, he asked. That's a new low. Typed, I corrected. But yeah, same energy. That night, I installed a second layer of security cameras, one facing the street, another catching the side yard where my meter boxes were. I wasn't taking chances. 2 days later, the police showed up. A patrol car and an unmarked vehicle pulled into Debra's driveway just after noon. I watched from my porch as 3 officers stepped out, 2 uniformed, one in plainclothes with a leather folder under his arm. They knocked once. Debra opened the door, exchanged a few words, then stepped outside with her arms crossed like she was still running a meeting. The plainclothes officer handed her a document. She read it quickly, then shouted something I couldn't hear. Her voice cracked and she tried to step back inside. That's when the 2 uniformed officers blocked the doorway. She was escorted, not cuffed, but the message was clear. Carol called me 20 minutes later. They've frozen the HOA's operating account, she said. The DA's office issued a subpoena for all board communications and vendor contracts. What about Maxwell? Investigators are on their way to his office. He's on the Articles of Incorporation for Pinebrush Solutions. I leaned against the porch railing. That'll be hard to explain as a coincidence. The next evening, we held an emergency community meeting at the clubhouse. Carol chaired it. Russ and Tanya flanked her. Neighbors packed the room, some in disbelief, others visibly angry. Carol stood up. We've confirmed that HOA funds were misappropriated through a fraudulent vendor linked directly to Debra's family. The authorities are involved. The board has voted to terminate her position effective immediately. A few people gasped. One guy in the back clapped once, awkwardly, then stopped. Carol continued. To prevent this from happening again, we're establishing a financial oversight committee made up of homeowners who aren't on the board. Transparent access, quarterly audits, and no more single signature checks. Someone raised a hand. How did this go on for so long? Tanya answered. Because people trusted the title more than the person. That landed harder than anything else said in the room. After the meeting, I stayed behind to help stack chairs. Carol walked over, carrying a clipboard full of new volunteer sign-ups. You know, she said, you'd be good on the committee? No thanks, I said. I prefer my battles short and my coffee hot, she laughed. Fair enough, but if you ever change your mind. I nodded, then headed home. The air on Sycamore Lane felt different already. Not peaceful exactly, but lighter. The kind of calm that comes from knowing the worst part is over. As I walked up my driveway, a few neighbors waved. One offered to help me finish unpacking the shed. Another handed me a fresh baked pie. And for the first time since I moved in, I didn't feel like I was defending my property. I felt like I was part of the neighborhood. Radar barked once from the porch, then lay down again. Yeah, we were going to be just fine. The week after Debra's removal, Sycamore Lane felt like a shaken snow globe. The glitter was still floating, but at least the storm had passed. I spent most of my days finishing the last of my unpacking, installing shelves in the garage, and fixing a loose railing on the back deck. Neighbors were walking by more often now, not to gawk, but to actually talk. Older couples, families with kids, a few younger folks who'd been keeping their heads down. Turned out, people had a lot more to say once they weren't afraid of being written up for putting their recycling bin out too early. Reggie dropped by around midweek with a manila folder and a 6-pack of something brewed locally. You seen this yet? he asked, handing me the folder. Inside were copies of the HOA's annual insurance renewals, all signed by Debra over the past 3 years. The coverage was wildly inflated millions in liability protection for a neighborhood of modest homes, and a premium that had jumped over 60% in under 24 months. These were submitted without board vote, Reggie said. Carol found them in a storage bin behind the clubhouse, buried under old pool maintenance invoices. I scanned the pages. The insurance broker, Palisade Risk Management, that name ring any bells? Reggie raised an eyebrow. Owned by her cousin. Different last name, but same address Debra listed on her bankruptcy filing from years back. I leaned back in my chair. So she's been funneling money through fake vendors and padding premiums through family. That explains the missing funds. Not just padding, Reggie said. There's more. Carol gave this to me confidentially, but I think you should see it. He passed me a second folder. Inside was a letter from the county tax assessor's office. It detailed a lien placed on the HOA's community lot, the small parcel where the clubhouse and pool sat. Apparently, Debra had used the lot as collateral for a private loan 2 years ago, claiming it was unused surplus land. The lender had just filed a default notice. She mortgaged the neighborhood's shared property, I said, stunned. That's fraud. Worse, Reggie added. The loan's connected to a real estate group that's been buying up distressed HOA properties. If they foreclose, we lose the clubhouse, the pool, and control of future dues. I didn't waste time. I called Tyson NG from the DA's office, the same investigator who'd taken the financial evidence before. He agreed to meet me the next morning outside the county records building. Tyson was already waiting when I arrived, holding a cup of coffee and looking more tired than last time we met. Loan fraud now? He asked as I handed over the documents. She listed it as personal property. Never got board approval, never disclosed it, and now a private equity group circling. Tyson flipped through the paperwork, then pulled out his phone. If this checks out, he said, we're upgrading the charges. That's felony misrepresentation and potential wire fraud if electronic documents were involved. I nodded. They were. She submitted everything through HOA email. Carol already provided the server logs. He didn't answer right away, just stared at the folder like it was a loaded gun. All right, he said finally. I'll bring this to the task force. We've got a financial crimes judge who will fast-track a warrant if we can tie the loan to personal gain. By sunset, news had already started to trickle through the community. Word spread faster than wildfire when it had Debra's name on it. The next morning, I woke up to a flurry of urgent texts not from neighbors but from Carol. Raid happening. Clubhouse. Get here now. I grabbed my keys and drove the 3 blocks to the community lot. 2 unmarked black vehicles were parked outside the clubhouse, along with a county sheriff's cruiser. Deputies moved in and out of the building with boxes, laptops, and a printer that looked like it hadn't worked since the Bush administration. Carol met me near the edge of the property, her expression tense. They found more, she said under her breath. Hard copies of everything she didn't even bother shredding. Contracts, bank slips, even a copy of the loan with her signature and a forged board vote sheet. Forged, she wrote in our names. Misspelled 2 of them. Tyson emerged from the building, looking grim. She's going to jail, he said plainly. This isn't just HOA overreach anymore. She committed bank fraud, wire fraud, and misappropriation of community assets. We'll be filing charges today. What about the lien on the lot? I asked. Already contacted the lender. Once we prove the board never authorized the deal, the note becomes invalid. It'll take a hearing, but we'll keep the property. Back at home, I sat on the porch and watched as neighbors gathered again, only this time it wasn't with fear or frustration. It was relief. People were chatting, actually smiling. Kids were riding bikes without anyone snapping photos of their helmets for safety violations. A few days later, the county held a press conference. Debra was arrested on 5 felony counts. Her husband, Maxwell, was indicted as well for co-conspiracy in creating shell vendors and laundering HOA funds through the fake insurance firm. The equity group that had tried to acquire the community lot quietly pulled out once the legal notice was filed. The judge issued a restraining order barring Debra and Maxwell from entering any HOA-governed community in the county. The board voted unanimously to dissolve all existing vendor contracts and start fresh, with oversight from a volunteer audit team made up of residents. Carol was named interim president, but she refused a salary. "We're not running a kingdom," she said during the first open meeting. "We're running a neighborhood." When it was my turn to speak, I kept it short. "None of this happened because I'm special. It happened because I didn't back down." You can't fix a place by hoping it gets better. You fix it by showing up. The room clapped loud, real applause this time, not the awkward kind. I looked around and realized I finally knew most of these faces. Not just names, but stories. The couple who ran a thrift shop. The retired firefighter with a garden full of peppers. The single mom who worked overnight shifts at the hospital. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We were a community. That weekend, we held a block party, no permits, no forms, just food, music, and lawn chairs. Someone brought a karaoke machine. Reggie sang a painfully off-key version of Don't Stop Believin', and Radar howled along, which only made it better. Carol handed me a cold drink and nodded toward the crowd. "You staying for good?" I looked around at the kids running with glow sticks, the parents laughing, the lights strung between trees. "Yeah," I said. "I'm home." The cameras were still installed, not because I expected trouble, but because this time I'd be ready if it ever came knocking again. But judging by the way things felt now, I doubted I'd need them. Sycamore Lane had finally found its voice, and Debra. She found herself behind bars with no clipboard and no audience. Some call that justice. I call it peace.